Picture this. KiwiSaver is basically the All Blacks of your retirement plan. You've got different positions on the field. Some bruising forwards that play it safe and grind out meters. That's your conservative fund. And some flash Harry wingers sprinting down the sideline, ready to score big, but also ready to get smashed. That's your aggressive fund. And just like in cricket, you don't send the tail ender out to slog sixes in the first over. Your time frame, your goal, and your nerves decide whether you play it steady with singles or swing for the boundary. Joining us today is a friend of mine, Milford financial advisor Liam Robertson. He's next.
Financial freedom faster. Financial freedom faster.
Now, if you actually want to make money instead of sitting on the couch refreshing Trade Me or watching the neighbours place double in value, hit that subscribe button. In 2025, more Kiwis are choosing to get their smarts from this show than anywhere else. Be a trendsetter, not a sheep. Liam, if KiwiSaver is part rugby, part cricket, and part netball, why does it still feel like most of us are sitting on the bench not knowing what we're doing?
I've never probably had it put to me that way, Craig, but I like where you're going with it. I think it comes down to financial education and literacy. KiwiSaver is 18 years old now, and probably in the first few years, a lot of people didn't give it as much attention as it deserves because balances were low, but they're now climbing a lot higher and people are starting to take it a lot more seriously. I think if people, to use your analogy, want to get off the bench and onto the field, then they need to increase their financial literacy, and the best place to start, I think, is with financial advice.
It's a really good point, Liam, because at school they don't teach you these kind of things, and yet these are some of the most important things you should learn in life. So where does that come from? The fact that we go to you at Milford Funds, or that mum and dad at home start teaching kids at an early age?
I think it's a bit of both. Education does start in the home, but you don't know what you don't know. So I actually encourage people, if they don't know, involve the family in the advice. You know, we have conversations with mum and dads. Sometimes they say, can the kids sit in and listen? And that's absolutely fine. Make it a whole family education thing, I think. And, financial advice now is more accessible than it ever has been. And in most cases for KiwiSaver, it's free. So there's really no reason not to engage with some form of advice out there.
Realistically, Liam, how financially literate is the community?
I think they're probably more literate than we think they are, but Kiwis are pretty humble. So I think we're sometimes a bit worried about sounding like we don't know what we're talking about. And so it's just easier to sort of, pretend that we don't know as much as we do. But I think when you get down to it, everyone's capable of upskilling. No one's an expert at everything. So, look, could be more literate, but I think it's a lot better than it was, say, 20 years ago.
You're right, because when you go to the doctor, you don't really say to him, hey, I drink a bottle of wine every night, even though you're not feeling too well. People are embarrassed to say that they don't know things. Are you able to spot that very quickly on?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of, like anything, you don't just jump straight into personal questions when you're chatting with someone. You do kind of have a little bit of a discussion at the start, and, we will tend to ask rather some open questions just to find out a wee bit more about someone's situation, and you can kind of gauge pretty quickly how much they know to begin with, and then you can cater the conversation from there on. So you can kind of, make it comfortable for anyone, no matter what background they're coming from.
Does anyone ever wake up in the morning and say, yes, I'm a moderate funds person?
I don't think so, no. I think everyone... I think the general concept is that a lot of people think or know they should be in a growth fund, because for most people that is probably appropriate. And in fact, we've gone from having a quarter of all KiwiSaver members in growth funds to, in the latest FMA report, about half of us are now. So I think a lot of people kind of know that KiwiSaver is a long-term investment. They should probably be taking a bit more risk, but it's about being comfortable with that, and that's where advice comes into it.
Explain a growth fund.
A growth fund is essentially 80% shares and 20% bonds and cash. No matter if you've got your KiwiSaver with a specialist like Milford or with the bank, that is essentially what you're getting into with a growth fund.
All right. And yet The New Zealand share market has been pretty average over the last couple of years, so your money's essentially going offshore.
For the most part, your money is going offshore, and that's not necessarily just because the New Zealand share market has been a little bit of an underperformer recently, as you say. It's simply because KiwiSaver's got a little bit too big for the New Zealand share market. We're up to over $120 billion now, and you just physically can't invest all of that money in New Zealand. It wouldn't actually be prudent to do so. You sort of have all your eggs in one basket. So a lot of the money does go offshore, and that opens up great opportunities for KiwiSaver investors.
Clearly, Donald Trump just has to open his mouth, and it does affect the share market. And the tariffs, I don't think anyone should be really that surprised at what's happened, but we certainly don't know what's happening from one day to the next. How does that affect the growth fund, particularly in this presidency, which is unusual by historic standards?
Well, I think with any fund, and in particular a growth fund, because you do have an increased exposure to shares, the share market doesn't like uncertainty. And I guess that is Donald Trump, right? He is uncertainty personified. We don't know what he's going to do next. And so he could come out tomorrow and cause the share market to rocket if he decided to remove tariffs, for example, or he could come out tomorrow and cause it to plummet if he was to increase tariffs. So naturally, a growth fund is going to be a bit more volatile than a lower risk fund, and it's not necessarily Trump that's going to cause movements. It could be, the geopolitical stuff we've got going on at the moment. We've had COVID not so long ago. So the thing to be aware of and cautious of with a growth fund is that it is a longer term investment, and you can't get too caught up in what's happening day to day, month to month, or even year to year.
What's the alternative from a growth fund if you're not too keen on that risk? Because with Russia at the moment, NATO was called into action, or potentially called into action with the with the Polish airspace over the weekend. You've got Trump, obviously. Things aren't very stable at the moment, geopolitically.
Oh, well, there's plenty of options. But before I go down that track, I'd also just say, look, to be honest, if you're in a growth fund and you're buying into your KiwiSaver every time you get paid, then you almost want a little bit of volatility, because it means that things go on sale. Whenever the market falls and you're a regular buyer, you're actually able to get units in your KiwiSaver at a cheaper price. And any other market in the world, you want to buy stuff for cheap. You don't want to buy things that keep getting more expensive, and KiwiSaver is much like that. But to your point, not everyone's into it, and for some people, they're just simply not in a position where they should be in a growth fund. Maybe their time frame is such that they need more stability. And so you've got a variety of funds below growth. Typically, they're called balanced, moderate, conservative, or cash. And what you're looking at there is just trading out some of that share exposure for more bonds and cash, which are lower risk, less volatile. And then the trade-off there is they are also typically lower returning as well.
How much of a return are you getting on a growth fund at the moment?
The average growth fund in New Zealand over the last 10 years has returned about 8% per annum after fees. And so, of course, that's average. Some will have been a bit worse than that, and some will have done better than that.
What about conservative fund?
Conservative fund, you're probably looking at more about 4 or 5% over the last 10 years.
Which realistically suggests some people would have been going backwards because of inflation in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, inflation, it was high, wasn't it? Sort of got up to about 7% or so. And that's the reality. Without taking risk, there is no reward. And if you want to sit in a conservative fund or sit in the bank, then you will be battling with inflation, just trying to tread water. And that is why we suggest to people that they should get advice, take some more risk, take an educated approach to taking that risk, and that way you can be invested to get those rewards and to keep ahead of inflation.
What's the single biggest piece of advice you could give to someone who essentially is an ignoramus dealing with KiwiSaver?
Have a plan.
They don't have a plan. They're an ignoramus. They're coming to you. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, I know, but that's that's the first thing I do with someone is we set a plan, because if you have no plan, if we're going to use your sports analogy, the All Blacks just retained the Bearside Cup again. They went out there with a plan, right, to beat the Wallabies, and so if you're dealing with, I wouldn't use the word ignoramus, but if we're dealing with someone like that, they're obviously wanting help because they've come to have a chat with someone like me. And the best thing to give them help is to put them on a course to somewhere they want to be. So do they want to own a home? Do they want to have a retirement where their standard of living is equivalent or better to what they have while they're working? If the answer is yes, then we can start building a plan off the back of that.
So the plan was for the Penrith Panthers to go into their 6th consecutive NRL Grand Final, and they were up 14-0 at half-time, and then in the last 4 minutes, the Brisbane Broncos scored a try and Adam Reynolds kicked from the sideline. That wasn't their plan. What happens when your plan falls apart like that? Because clearly, I think everyone would have bet on Ivan Cleary's team to win that. So what happens in your situation when the plan doesn't go to plan?
Oh, yeah, sometimes there's someone called Reece Walsh, right? And he gets a ball away and there's a try scored. Yeah, look, there's sometimes plans don't go to plan. That's right. And that's where someone like myself as an advisor can help. I guess we're like the coach in that analogy. And you might say, well, look, again, in that game, Ivan Cleary, his plan didn't work out, but his success has been pretty good. 5 of the last grand finals, they've been there. So their plan might have been to get 6, but if you aim for the stars, you land on the moon kind of thing. They've done better with him coaching them than if he hadn't been there.
Liam, that is absolutely outstanding advice. Threw you under a bus there, and you took it really, really well. Appreciate you coming on today. It was a bit of a challenging interview. Threw a couple of curly ones there, but that answer in the end was particularly outstanding. Hope to have you back. That's Liam Robertson from Milford Financial. Thank you.